Hello, Lyssa deHart here. I wanted to talk today about something that actually showed up in a mentor coaching call and which shows up for all of us in our coaching at some point or another. And these are the ideas of transference and countertransference that can occur in coaching. And it occurs in really any helping profession. So if you're a therapist, if you're a doctor, if you're a coach, if you're basically anybody who's working with other human beings, be it a nurse, being any kind of practitioner, we can often have the client stuff and our stuff show up very similarly. So in the mentor coaching that I was doing earlier, one of the things that was showing up was the client had a big inner narrative around feedback and not wanting to have feedback because any feedback that wasn't perfect feedback really had the client feeling like they didn't want to play anymore. Here's your ball, go home. I don't want to play anymore. And I think this shows up for all of us to some degree or another. If we're working with other people, their issues will often come into our shared space and touch on issues that we also might be dealing with in our own life. And for many people, the idea of perfectionism is a very common sort of thing that we deal with. And an example of this would be, I mean, in my own life, when I was writing my book or writing any of the books that I'm working on, there's a sense of if I can't do it right, maybe I shouldn't do it at all. Or if everybody doesn't like it, then maybe I shouldn't do it. Or the possibility is that everybody won't like it, so therefore I should stop now. So speaking of that, on my book, The Reflective Coach, one of the chapters that I have is around transference. And I'm going to just read this. And so let me put on my glasses so that I can do that. Transference and countertransference are ways in which the client and or coach may lay feelings about one person on another person. Examples, you might experience a client who places unrealistic demands for your expertise, or if you're a coach with a young adult children, you might feel about your young adult client as though through the lens of your relationship with your own children. Maybe you start off offering advice instead of seeing your client as whole, capable, resourceful, and creative. Exploring these places where there is transference and where we may be in countertransference is critical exploration. And part of the reason it's so critical is because when we have unexamined biases that are showing up in our coaching conversations, and if I have a bias of perfectionism makes me uncomfortable because I'm dealing with it, you're talking about your discomfort with your perfectionism and trying to move through it. I may not feel comfortable to ask you questions that challenge the story or the values or the experience that you're having for fear that it might trigger my own, which would be an example of countertransference. I'm transferring now onto my client my own limitations, my own fears, my own beliefs about what is or is not possible. And it's sort of interesting. I used to see this when I was doing a lot of marriage counseling. People would come to me for marriage counseling and say to me, you know, we're really worried. The last therapist told us our marriage was never going to work. And I think this was a great example of it. There were many relationships that my clients had that I would not want to be in. And they may not have wanted to be in my relationship either. But that doesn't mean that those clients weren't capable of sorting through their relationship. Now, they might not be also, but who am I to determine for another person what they are capable of doing? And so that's another place where countertransference can come up. If I don't feel like I can do something, I may think for my client that they may not be able to do something also, when in fact, with the right kind of curiosity, with the right sort of exploration of what's getting in their way, what they want to do about that, They may very easily be able to do something that I'm completely incapable of doing. Hence the reason why I don't have to be a doctor in order to be a coach to doctors. I don't need to be a lawyer in order to coach lawyers. I don't need to be an actor in order to coach actors, because what we're not talking about, or rather what we are talking about, are the underlying driving factors that are impacting their actions and ultimately their outcomes. What we're not talking about is my expertise in whatever field they find themselves. And so one of the things a coach can start to do, especially when starting to look at their own transference issues and countertransference issues, where the client may come to them with some transference of, you're the expert, I need you to tell me what to do, which a lot of coaches get from clients. The expectation is, well, you're supposed to tell me what to do. And well, my first question to the client who tells me that I'm supposed to tell them what to do is, what has you needing to abdicate your own responsibility for your life to me, this other person who doesn't actually live with the impact of that? I don't know. It's an interesting question. And yet we all have these places in our lives where we would just like somebody to tell us what to do. But that's a really good place for a coach to get curious with a client, unless the coach also is dealing with their own sense of, I need to be the expert. I'm supposed to solve problems for clients and I need to fix this. So therefore the coach then maybe gets hooked into playing the role of maybe the advisor, the mentor, the consultant, instead of being curious with the client around what's driving the insecurity that's leading them to ask for somebody else to solve their life problem. So one of the things I would invite, going back to what I would invite for coaches, is to write down a client situation in which you may have stepped out of your coach role, or where you were also maybe felt like you were only one or two steps ahead of your client on a very similar road, and start asking yourself some questions. So here are some of the questions that I put down in my book. These are not the only questions to ask yourself, but what transference or countertransference do you want to name? And what does this awareness allow you to explore in your coaching? So take a moment and think about a client situation where you felt like you got hooked in some way, or you slipped into a different role, or the client is dealing with the same exact circumstance that you're dealing with. Maybe they're, a perfectionist and you're a perfectionist, or maybe they have a value of always doing things right, or being externally motivated versus internally motivated and wanting to be told how great they are. Notice what situations align with you, with your clients, and start to explore what's showing up there. What patterns or client situations or requests hook you? You're going to find there's probably a theme. There may be different circumstances along the way, like it may show up this way or that way or this other way, but underlying all of those situations may be a theme. Maybe it's the perfectionism, maybe it's the inner critic, maybe it's the, wanting to play bigger, share their voice. It could be anything. It could be abdicating personal responsibility for our own big choices. In hindsight, are there specific people or situations that you find yourself with muddy boundaries? In being aware of this, how will you be intentional? And so this is a big part of it too. Where do we cross our own boundaries? We know as a coach that my role as a coach is to be in partnership, in a co-creative partnership around depth and breadth of supporting somebody to make their own internal insights. When we look at our own ethical statements, we're really in belief of the client is whole, capable, resourceful, and I add creative, right? So we have a general belief in this. How do we not manifest that belief when we're telling people what to do? What hooks us? Where do we notice our expertise gets really brought into the conversation because we are totally hooked by it? How might countertransference impact trust and safety in your client relationship? It's sort of interesting when you look at the work of Boyatzis and some of the other people out of Case Western University, and you look at this idea of positive emotional attractors versus negative emotional attractors. Well, what we're doing is we're starting to tell people what to do. We're starting to brainstorm with them all the actions they need to take because they said, I need to have tools by the end of this conversation. And the coach goes gung ho on exploring the tools they need versus what's driving the need for tools. What ends up happening is people often feel told what to do. Think about it. If I were to just tell you what to do to solve your big life problems, how are you going to enjoy that experience? Very rarely have I had somebody go, oh, yeah, I love it when other people tell me what to do. Now, we like ideas. We love ideas, but this is the place where a coach can be transparent. The thought that's coming up for me is I might be considering trying XYZ, but I don't even know if that would work for you. As you hear me say that, how does that land on you? And what might you do instead, if not that? What we want to do is we want to open it up to the client, but we don't want to avoid it or assume we know and go laser focused straight into it. Ask yourself what you are learning as you hear me talk about this idea of transference. What are the places that you might want to play with your own coaching and your own exploration of your coaching? What are the places that you want to really anchor for yourself as places of awareness where you can then explore that throughout your coaching relationships? Because human beings tend to be patterned. You will find more than likely that whatever showed up in one place will not only show up in one place, but you may have multiple opportunities of places where you can explore the things where you have transference onto you and transference onto the people that you work with. Well, I hope this was useful today, and I will see you in another video.